Imagine this. You're sitting in the plush comfort of first class, ready to enjoy a peaceful flight when suddenly everything changes in a way you never expected. Keanu Reeves, a Hollywood legend and seasoned traveler, found himself caught in a shocking incident he could have never predicted. What started as a routine flight soon turned into a chaotic moment that would alter the course of the journey in ways no one could foresee. Denzel Washington, one of the most respected actors in the world, was sitting nearby in the same first-class cabin. But as Keanu watched, he saw something completely out of place, a confrontation, one that seemed entirely too personal. The situation escalated quickly, and before anyone could fully comprehend what was happening, Denzel was being kicked off the first-class section. It wasn't just a minor incident. It wasn't just a simple argument over a seat. The airline, once smooth and efficient, began to unravel right before Keanu's eyes. Tensions were high, and the chaos of the moment spread like wildfire. The flight was no longer just about getting from one place to another. No one, not even Keanu, could anticipate the fallout from this unexpected disruption. What happened next would surprise everyone, even the passengers who thought they were just along for the ride. The sun had just set, casting a golden hue over the horizon as the airplane soared high above the clouds. Keanu Reeves, a man who had seen his fair share of high-stress situations both on and off screen, was seated in a plush first-class seat, enjoying the comfort of his surroundings. He had been traveling non-stop for months, promoting his latest movie and juggling various projects. So this flight, this brief escape from the spotlight, was supposed to be a peaceful one, a chance to recharge, relax, and enjoy the quiet. As he settled back, Keanu could hear the soft hum of the engines, the rhythmic sound of the plane cutting through the air, the occasional chatter of passengers, the clinking of glasses, and the soft announcements from the flight attendants provided a calm soundtrack to his thoughts. The cabin crew was friendly, the service impeccable, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. The seats were spacious, the lighting warm, and the gentle sway of the plane felt almost soothing. Keanu had always appreciated the luxury of first class, but today the comfort felt even more special, perhaps because he was so tired. The plane was nearly halfway to its destination when Keanu noticed a man entering the first-class section. It was Denzel Washington, the Academy Award-winning actor, the man with the undeniable presence. Keanu smiled, recognizing the familiar face. The two had crossed paths at a few Hollywood events over the years, but they had never really spoken at length. Keanu admired Denzel from afar, always impressed with his poise, his talent, and the way he seemed to command any room he walked into. Denzel had that rare aura, the kind that immediately drew people's attention without him needing to say a word. He exuded a calm, confident energy, the kind that was almost magnetic. As Denzel made his way down the aisle, Keanu couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he moved through the cabin. But something wasn't quite right. Denzel seemed slightly agitated, his eyes scanning the area around him. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with something Keanu couldn't quite place. Frustration, perhaps, or discomfort. Denzel paused for a moment, looking around as if searching for something or someone. Keanu watched him carefully, noting how Denzel's usually composed face seemed to carry an underlying tension. Keanu, not one to intrude, leaned back in his seat and let the situation play out. He assumed that it was just a minor issue, maybe a seat mix-up or a simple pre-flight jitter. After all, everyone was bound to have some stress when traveling, especially on long flights. He tried to shake off the growing sense of unease that had crept into the air. But as he watched Denzel moving further into the cabin, it became clear that something more significant was unfolding. The flight attendants were still attending to their duties, greeting passengers with smiles and offering drinks, unaware of the subtle tension beginning to bubble just a few rows ahead. But Keanu was no longer focused on the soothing hum of the engines or the soft lighting. His eyes were fixed on Denzel, who was now in a quiet exchange with one of the flight attendants. The conversation seemed calm enough at first, but there was an unmistakable change in Denzel's posture as he began to argue, his tone firm but measured. Keanu's instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. Denzel, usually the picture of composure, was now standing his ground in a way that suggested more was going on than just a seating issue. Keanu's thoughts raced. Was it a misunderstanding? A mistake in the booking system? A simple mix-up over where someone was supposed to sit? He didn't know, but he could feel the atmosphere shifting. The air felt thicker now, charged with tension. Keanu sat up straighter in his seat, eyes locked on the situation unfolding ahead of him. He saw the flight attendant speak into her radio, her movements quickening, and then another staff member appeared, looking at Denzel with an expression that conveyed both authority and concern. Denzel's voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it that hinted at his growing frustration. Keanu couldn't hear their exact words, but the body language was enough to tell him that this wasn't going to be resolved quietly. As the seconds passed, the tension escalated. Denzel, still standing his ground, wasn't backing down. Keanu noticed a shift in the cabin, passengers glancing nervously toward the front. He could sense the unease ripple through the air. It was as if everyone was collectively holding their breath, waiting for something to give. The atmosphere, once relaxed and calm, was now filled with anticipation and unease. Then, without warning, the situation reached a boiling point. One of the flight attendants gestured toward Denzel, and the look on her face was unmistakable. She was no longer being polite. She was firm, almost forceful. Keanu could see the tension in Denzel's face, his jaw tightening. The exchange had gone from a polite discussion to something more uncomfortable. Something was clearly happening that was larger than a simple disagreement over a seat. The air around Keanu felt charged with nervous energy. He watched, heart racing, unsure of what would happen next. And then it happened. The crew, having clearly lost patience, made the decision to remove Denzel from first class. Keanu could hardly believe his eyes. The scene was surreal. A man like Denzel Washington, one of the most respected actors in Hollywood, was being asked to leave his seat in first class. As Denzel turned to walk toward the back of the plane, Keanu couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the actor. It was a surreal moment, one that seemed to blur the line between reality and the drama of a movie scene. Keanu stood, making his way toward the crew, a mix of disbelief and empathy filling his thoughts. What was going on? This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a moment that would change the tone of the flight, perhaps even the reputation of the airline. The situation was unraveling, and what had started as a minor disagreement had now escalated into something far bigger. Keanu couldn't have known it then, but the flight was about to become a reflection of how a small moment, mishandled, could snowball into a crisis. What happened next would affect the airline in ways no one could predict, and it was a moment Keanu would never forget. It started with a slight disagreement. Denzel Washington, the celebrated actor known for his calm and poised demeanor, had been assigned a seat in the first-class cabin of the plane. Keanu Reeves, sitting nearby, overheard bits of the conversation, as they spoke in hushed tones. At first it seemed like a simple mix-up. Denzel's reservation had been mistakenly assigned to another passenger. The flight attendant, a polite young woman, explained the situation with a somewhat apologetic tone. She told Denzel that, unfortunately, his seat was taken, and they would need to move him to a seat in the economy section. Keanu, watching from the corner of his eye, saw how Denzel initially reacted. He remained calm, nodding as he listened, accepting the news with a grace that many others might not have been able to muster. However, as the attendant continued to speak, Denzel's expression slowly shifted. His posture, once relaxed, became more rigid, and the calm in his eyes started to fade. Keanu could tell that something about this situation wasn't sitting well with him. The thought of being moved from the premium first-class section to economy, where he had not booked or paid for a seat, wasn't something Denzel appeared to be willing to accept, especially given his status and reputation. Keanu had always admired Denzel for his composure. He had seen the actor play some of the most intense roles on screen with unmatched control, and to see him visibly frustrated was unusual. Keanu knew this wasn't just a matter of a simple seating mistake. This was something that, given Denzel's calm and usually unflappable demeanor, was clearly more personal than it appeared. Denzel was a man who had earned his place, and he had every right to expect that the airline would honor his reservation. especially in a section where he had paid a premium for his experience. The conversation between Denzel and the flight attendant continued, and Keanu could sense the tension mounting. Denzel's voice, once calm, began to rise slightly. Keanu couldn't hear every word, but he could see the frustration building in Denzel's expression. The flight attendant, trying to remain professional, was polite but firm in repeating the offer to move him to economy. She explained that there had been a mistake with the seat assignments, but Denzel wasn't hearing it. It was clear that the inconvenience of the mix-up, the suggestion that he move, and the offer to make do with another seat simply didn't sit well with him. Denzel finally raised his voice just enough for Keanu to hear, his tone now tinged with frustration. "I don't care about the mix-up, but I paid for this seat and I'm not moving." His words, though measured, carried an undeniable force. It was a simple statement, but it was clear that Denzel wasn't backing down. His voice had a quiet intensity, a calm authority that left no room for further negotiation. The flight attendant, though still polite, was clearly caught in an uncomfortable position. She repeated the offer, but Denzel stood firm, his body language now clearly signaling that he wasn't going to be moved by words alone. The tension in the air was thickening, and Keanu's heart began to race. He had never seen Denzel like this before. The man was known for his even temper and ability to handle pressure with grace, but in this moment, he was visibly frustrated and unwilling to relent. Keanu could tell that this wasn't just about the seat. It was about the principle of the matter. Denzel had done everything right. He had booked and paid for the seat he was assigned, and now he was being asked to move due to a simple mistake that wasn't his fault. Keanu watched as Denzel's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tightening as he stood his ground. The flight attendant, realizing the exchange wasn't going anywhere, called over a senior staff member to intervene. Within moments, a second flight attendant appeared, and Keanu noticed the tension in the air shift. It was no longer just a simple seating issue. It had become a full-on standoff. The two attendants, though trying to maintain professionalism, seemed uncomfortable with the escalation. They were now standing in front of Denzel, trying to reason with him. But there was no reasoning left. Denzel was resolute, and the situation was now starting to spiral out of control. Keanu could feel the weight of the moment. The whole cabin was watching, the other passengers sensing the growing discomfort. What had started as a small misunderstanding was now turning into something much bigger. The unease in the air was palpable. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some trying to pretend they weren't paying attention. But it was clear that everyone was focused on the drama unfolding just a few rows ahead. Then, without warning, the situation took a drastic turn. The head purser arrived, and there was a change in the atmosphere. The senior flight attendant spoke quickly and softly into her radio, signaling the arrival of the airline security team. Denzel, still standing his ground, looked at the head purser, his calm but firm demeanor unchanged. The purser, in a stern tone, suggested that Denzel should leave the first-class cabin. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave the first-class section," the purser said, her voice carrying a mix of authority and hesitance. The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was an eerie silence. Denzel paused, clearly stunned by the request. The idea of being escorted off the plane was one thing, an extreme measure to be sure, but to be asked to leave a section of the plane he had paid for seemed absurd. Keanu could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The tension had escalated, to such a degree that it felt surreal. Denzel, the man who had graced movie screens with performances of incredible depth and control, was now the center of an entirely different kind of drama. The calm flight had turned into a spectacle, and Keanu, though a mere observer, felt his own sense of discomfort rise. This wasn't just about a seating issue, this was about something deeper. The way Denzel was being treated, the lack of empathy from the airline staff, and the failure to resolve the situation in a calm and reasonable manner all seemed to be feeding into a larger unspoken conflict. Keanu watched as Denzel stood silently for a moment, absorbing the weight of the situation. He could see the frustration in Denzel's eyes, but also a sense of disbelief that this was even happening. What had started as a small inconvenience was quickly becoming a full-blown crisis. Keanu could see it clearly now. This wasn't just a disagreement over a seat. This was about respect. And in that moment, the plane wasn't just a means of transportation. It had become a stage for a drama that no one could have predicted. What happened next was a complete shock. The tension in the air, which had already reached a boiling point, seemed to intensify in a way no one had anticipated. The flight attendant, realizing that her attempts to resolve the issue with Denzel were unsuccessful, called for backup from the head purser. The situation was now officially escalating. Keanu watched closely, his sense of disbelief growing with every passing second. He'd seen security intervening before, but those were usually incidents involving serious disturbances, altercations, physical confrontations, or situations where safety was at risk. This, however, seemed like something far more minor, a simple disagreement over a seating mix-up. But the arrival of two security officers at the entrance to the first-class cabin quickly changed that perception. Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. It was surreal to witness. The officers didn't seem threatening, but the fact that security had been called at all felt like an overreaction. Denzel, who had always maintained a calm, composed demeanor, was now standing in front of them, facing the officers. Keanu could feel the weight of the moment in the air, the tension practically suffocating everyone around. What started as a simple misunderstanding now felt like an explosive conflict that had the potential to spiral out of control. The officers spoke to Denzel calmly, their words measured, but there was no mistaking the authority in their voices. "We need you to leave the first-class cabin and move to economy," one of them said, his tone polite but firm. The words seemed surreal to Keanu. Denzel Washington, one of the most respected actors in Hollywood, being asked to leave a premium section of the plane? It felt almost absurd. Denzel's response, however, was unwavering. He didn't raise his voice, but there was no mistaking the defiance in his words. "I paid for this seat, and I'm staying here," he said, his voice steady but firm. His words weren't just a statement of entitlement, they were a statement of principle. Denzel wasn't just fighting for a seat, he was fighting for his dignity and respect. He wasn't going to let anyone push him around, regardless of the situation. The tension in the cabin grew palpable. Keanu could feel it in the air. Everyone was watching, unsure of what would happen next. The flight attendants and security officers were now speaking more urgently, their voices rising just a little as the situation began to spin out of control. The once calm atmosphere in first class was now thick with uncertainty. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to step in or remain silent. Some were obviously uncomfortable, while others were pretending to read their newspapers or watch the in-flight entertainment, but it was clear that everyone was following the drama unfold. Denzel remained calm, still standing his ground. Keanu could see the resolve in his face, his jaw set in determination. The situation, which had started as an inconvenience, had now turned into something much more significant. It was about dignity, respect, and fairness. The flight attendants had no more words to offer, and the security officers, having failed to calm Denzel down, were clearly growing frustrated. But they knew better than to escalate the situation further. They exchanged looks, trying to determine their next move. And then, things took an unexpected turn. The head purser, standing just a few feet away from the unfolding scene, spoke quickly into a walkie-talkie, the sound of static breaking the tension. Keanu saw the purser gesture toward Denzel, and then say something that made the entire cabin go silent. "You're being removed from the flight." The words hung in the air like a cold metallic weight. The realization hit like a ton of bricks. Denzel Washington was being removed from the flight? Keanu's mind raced. Was this really happening? This wasn't just about a seat mix-up anymore. This was turning into something far more serious. Denzel, who had remained composed through the entire exchange, looked momentarily stunned. His eyes flickered with disbelief, as if the magnitude of the situation hadn't fully hit him yet. But there was no mistaking the finality in the purser's words. Without saying another word, Denzel turned and began to walk toward the exit of the first-class section. The luxurious atmosphere that had once filled the cabin seemed to drain away as he moved toward the aisle. The silence was deafening, and Keanu could almost feel the collective breath of the passengers being held. No one knew how to react. The scene felt almost surreal, like something out of a movie, not real life. A Hollywood legend was being escorted off the plane over a seat mix-up. As Denzel walked down the aisle, the flight attendants were still whispering to each other, their hands shaking with nerves. The tension was thick, and the passengers exchanged glances, unsure how to interpret what they were witnessing. Some looked on in disbelief, while others sat in stunned silence, unsure whether they should intervene or remain passive observers. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something more to happen. Was this really happening? Was a man of Denzel's stature, someone who had earned the respect of millions, truly being kicked off the plane for something as trivial as a seat assignment error? Keanu watched as Denzel continued his walk toward the exit, his expression unreadable. He couldn't help but feel sympathy for the actor. Denzel, known for his stoic presence on screen, had been humiliated in front of everyone, and the worst part was, it didn't seem like anyone was even trying to de-escalate the situation. They were just following orders. It felt wrong, like the airline was mishandling the entire ordeal, but the situation wasn't over yet. As Denzel reached the back of the plane, Keanu noticed a few passengers whispering among themselves, their faces filled with disbelief. Some of them had seen the whole thing unfold, while others had only heard bits and pieces. The murmur of the crowd grew louder as they tried to process the events they had just witnessed. Was this how the airline treated its passengers? Keanu couldn't help but wonder if this single moment would impact the airline's reputation, far more than anyone realized. As Denzel disappeared from view, Keanu leaned back in his seat, still processing what he had just witnessed. The rest of the flight was filled with an uncomfortable silence. The once luxurious atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by an awkward tension that no one could escape. What had started as a simple seating issue had spiraled out of control, and the fallout was still unfolding. What happened next was a complete shock. The tension in the cabin had been rising steadily, and when the flight attendant failed to resolve the situation, she called for backup from the head purser. It was clear that things had escalated far, beyond what anyone had anticipated. Keanu could feel a chill run down his spine as the head purser made her way to the front of the cabin, closely followed by 2 security officers. The fact that security was involved took the situation from a minor seating disagreement to something far more serious. Keanu had seen security intervene before, but usually it was in cases of severe disturbances, altercations, confrontations, or threats. This, however, seemed like something much more minor, a seat mix-up that had spiraled out of control. As the 2 security officers approached, they spoke calmly to Denzel, trying to resolve the situation. "Sir, we need you to leave the first-class cabin," one of the officers said, his tone firm but measured. "We've reassigned your seat and we need you to move to economy." The words, although polite, were undeniably authoritative. Denzel had always been known for his calm demeanor and composure, but the way he was being treated now in front of everyone seemed to strike a chord with him. Keanu couldn't help but watch the exchange unfold, feeling a growing sense of disbelief. He had never seen Denzel act anything less than the picture of composure. But now, the man who had once played some of the most powerful roles in cinema was facing a humiliation no one could have expected. The tension was palpable, hanging thick in the air as Denzel's response cut through the silence. "I paid for this seat and I'm staying here," Denzel said, his voice steady but with a hint of defiance that rang through the cabin. Keanu could hear the undercurrent of frustration in Denzel's voice. He wasn't just being asked to move, he was being asked to move because of a mistake that wasn't his fault. He had booked a first-class seat, he had paid for it, and the airline had made an error. To be treated like this in front of everyone seemed like a violation of the actor's dignity. The room seemed to hold its breath. Passengers in the nearby seats shifted uncomfortably, some trying to glance at the unfolding scene without appearing too obvious, others pretending to be engrossed in their magazines or entertainment screens. The flight attendants, caught between their duty and the escalating situation, were now speaking more urgently, their voices tinged with uncertainty. The officers repeated their request, asking Denzel to move to the economy section, but he stood his ground. The quiet confidence that had always defined Denzel's character, both on and off screen, was now evident in the way he held his ground. He wasn't raising his voice, he wasn't becoming combative, but he was unwavering. He wasn't about to let someone dictate what he had rightfully paid for. In that moment, Keanu felt a deep sense of admiration for the actor. Denzel wasn't backing down from something that felt unjust, and Keanu knew how important that sense of principle was. Then, as if the whole cabin was holding its breath, things took an unexpected turn. The head purser, who had been standing at the front of the cabin watching the interaction, spoke quickly into a walkie-talkie. Keanu could see the sense of urgency in her eyes. The air around them had changed. The tension had reached its peak. The purser gestured toward Denzel, and her voice, though quiet, was firm and filled with authority. "You're being removed from the flight," she said, her words cutting through the already charged atmosphere. The announcement was so stark, so final that it almost seemed unreal. The silence in the cabin deepened. The words hung in the air like a cold weight. For a moment Denzel looked stunned, his brow furrowing in disbelief as the reality of the situation set in. He was being removed from the flight, not for any illegal behavior or violent outburst, but because of a seat mix-up, something entirely out of his control. Without saying another word, Denzel began to walk toward the exit of the first-class section. The once luxurious atmosphere of the cabin, so calm and serene just moments ago, now felt heavy with discomfort and awkwardness. The plane, which had been gliding smoothly through the sky, now seemed to be in a state of freefall, the events inside, the cabin echoing throughout the flight. As Denzel walked down the aisle, the once vibrant hum of conversation in the cabin died away. The flight attendants, still visibly shaken by the exchange, whispered quietly to each other, their hands shaking with nerves. Keanu, still sitting in his seat, couldn't help but notice the discomfort in the air. The passengers, who had been quiet witnesses to the escalating drama, exchanged uneasy glances. Some were watching the scene with wide eyes, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react. The uncomfortable silence had replaced what had been a peaceful, uneventful flight just minutes before. Keanu found himself struggling to make sense of the unfolding events. Was this really happening? Was a Hollywood legend, someone who had spent his career as a respected figure, actually being kicked off a flight for something as trivial as a seat mix-up? He could hardly believe it. Denzel's face, still calm but now tinged with a mixture of confusion and disbelief, made it all the more surreal. As Denzel passed by, the other passengers kept their heads down, pretending not to notice the awkwardness, but the whispers grew louder. Was this how the airline treated its passengers, how it treated its stars? Keanu watched Denzel's steady walk down the aisle, his back straight as he made his way to the rear of the plane. He could see the resilience in Denzel, the way he refused to show his vulnerability despite the situation. He had every reason to be angry, to lash out, but he remained composed, almost as if he was refusing to let the airline win by showing any sign of defeat. Keanu leaned back in his seat, his thoughts swirling. The uncomfortable silence in the cabin had replaced the quiet hum of engines, and the once peaceful flight now felt strange and tense. What had started as a minor inconvenience had spiraled into a situation no one could have foreseen. Denzel, who had every right to stay where he was now being escorted off the plane, and the airline's failure to handle the situation with grace had resulted in an entirely different kind of turbulence, one that had shaken the entire cabin as sea. Denzel reached the back of the plane and disappeared from view. Keanu couldn't help but wonder how this moment would be remembered. How would the airline recover from this? And what would the passengers think of the way things were handled? The once smooth flight now seemed like a distant memory. In the aftermath of the incident, Keanu's calm and composed intervention was met with widespread praise. As the news spread about what had happened on that flight, many began to commend Keanu for his rational approach in what could have easily escalated into an all-out confrontation. He had acted not out of emotion or anger, but with a level-headedness that made all the difference in diffusing a tense situation. His decision to step in and speak up when he saw things beginning to spiral out of control had avoided a major crisis, and by doing so, he had not only helped Denzel, but it also saved the airline from what could have been a devastating public relations disaster. The incident, though resolved relatively quickly, left a lingering impact on everyone involved. The airline, despite eventually rectifying the situation with Denzel, found itself reeling from the publicity surrounding the incident. What had started as a simple seating mix-up had escalated to something far larger than anyone had anticipated. Headlines spread across the media, with many criticizing the airline for its mishandling of the situation. The fallout wasn't just about Denzel Washington being removed from a first-class seat. It was about the way the airline had treated him and how their staff had failed to handle the situation with empathy and understanding. In the public eye, the airline was now seen as rigid and uncompromising, far from the customer-centric image it had tried to project. The incident had exposed a flaw in the airline's operations, its inability to manage conflicts with grace and tact. The story of that flight serves as a powerful reminder of how one moment of tension can spiral into something far larger than anyone anticipates. A minor issue, one that could have been solved quietly and without fanfare, was allowed to escalate because of poor communication, lack of empathy, and an unwillingness to understand the situation from the passenger's perspective. What might have been a small inconvenience turned into a public relations nightmare for the airline, and in the process, it became a lesson in how important it is to manage conflict with understanding and patience. The episode highlighted the critical role empathy plays in customer service, how listening, validating feelings, and offering solutions that take into account the human side of things can prevent a situation from getting out of hand. For Keanu, the situation reaffirmed his own personal philosophy. The greatest power sometimes lies in knowing when to step in and help resolve a situation, and when to stand up for what's right. In a world that often seems driven by power dynamics, fame, and ego, Keanu's calm and measured response was a stark contrast. He didn't let the potential drama of the situation sway him. Instead, he focused on what was necessary to bring resolution. By doing so, Keanu showed that it wasn't just about fame or being in the spotlight. It was about using one's position and influence to do the right thing when it mattered most. His decision to intervene wasn't born out of a desire for attention or recognition. It was a simple desire to help bring about a peaceful resolution. For Denzel, the experience was a humbling one, albeit one that came with a valuable lesson. No amount of fame or success could shield anyone from life's injustices or misunderstandings. Denzel had spent decades building a reputation for excellence, both as an actor and as a person. He was a beloved figure, admired for his grace, talent, and intelligence. And yet here he was in a situation where he was treated like any other passenger, caught in a bureaucratic snafu. The incident reminded him, and anyone watching, that no one is above the basic principles of fairness, dignity, and respect. Regardless of the status one holds, everyone deserves to be treated with courtesy and understanding. And sometimes, the most powerful response is simply standing up for what you know is right, even in the face of adversity. But the situation also served as a reminder for both men of the power of resilience. Despite being removed from the flight, Denzel handled the situation with a quiet strength that was not lost on the other passengers. He didn't lose his cool, didn't make a scene, and when the issue was resolved, he carried himself with dignity, never letting the situation affect his personal integrity. This was a man who had built his career not just on talent, but on his personal values, and those values showed through even in the most uncomfortable of circumstances. Denzel's ability to remain composed, even when faced with humiliation, was a testament to his character. For Keanu, the entire ordeal reinforced the idea that sometimes the most difficult moments in life are the ones that offer the most opportunity for growth and connection. This was a powerful moment for both men, not just because of the external drama, but because of the internal lessons they each learned. Keanu's calm intervention wasn't just a one-time action, it was a reflection of who he was as a person. In the face of conflict, he chose compassion over confrontation, dialogue over anger. That decision changed the trajectory of that flight and ultimately affected the reputation of the airline. But it also reminded everyone involved that in moments of tension, A kind and compassionate approach could make all the difference. The aftermath was in some ways a turning point for both Keanu and Denzel. For the airline, it was a wake-up call that customer service and handling conflicts with empathy were just as important as any other aspect of their business. For Denzel, it was a reminder that fame and success come with their own set of challenges, and that he would continue to be a role model by responding to those challenges with dignity and composure. And for Keanu, it was another affirmation of the values he had always believed in, the importance of stepping up in times of need, standing up for what is right, and using one's influence for good. In the end, the situation was a reminder that, even in the most stressful and uncomfortable of situations, a calm and compassionate approach can make all the difference. Through their actions, Keanu and Denzel proved that it's not always about winning or getting your way. It's about handling adversity with grace and respect. The incident that once seemed like a simple misunderstanding had evolved into a powerful lesson on how to manage conflict and how to turn a negative situation into a moment of growth and understanding. The journey of that flight didn't end with the resolution of the seat mix-up. It ended with two men, two icons, demonstrating the true power of empathy, compassion, and standing firm in what is right.